Hi everybody and welcome to Storytime again. Lovely to see you. I'm excited about talking to you about the next part of the Bible story in our walking through the Bible together. Last week we talked about Samson, didn't we? And just as we finished really talking about Samson, I wonder whether any of you have Lyle's golden syrup in your cupboard at all. Because you might do. And you might not know that on the tin of Lyle's golden syrup, in the middle is the logo of a lion. And inside that logo it says these words, "Out of the strong came forth sweetness." Now, over 100 years ago, the people that make this golden syrup decided to take the story of Samson from the Bible and to use it as their logo in selling their sweet golden syrup, using the story of Samson and how he killed the lion and the bees made honey from the carcass of the lion. So maybe you can find this if you go shopping with mum and dad or whoever you're living with at this time, or you might find some in your cupboard. Maybe you could tell a friend the story of Samson using a tin of golden syrup. Okay, so we're going to continue with our Bible story now. And today I want to tell you the story that follows on. It's right at the end of the time of the Judges. And here's a man here, and his name is called Elkanah. And he lives in the little town of Bethlehem. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking Jesus came from Bethlehem. That's right. But Elkanah and his wife, Naomi, they came from Bethlehem about 1,000 years before Jesus. And they lived there, and they had two boys. And here are their two boys. I'm going to put them over here. One of them was called Marlon, and one of them was called Killian. Let me put them straight. Killian and Marlon. And the Bible tells us that during the time of the Judges, there was no food or water in the land. There was a famine. It was difficult to get food, difficult to get water. And so Naomi and her husband, Elkanah, decided to leave their country of Israel, leave the town of Bethlehem. And they travelled outside the country. They crossed over the river, which is called the River Jordan, and they went to another country. They took with them their two boys, Marlon and Killian. And while they were there in this other country that was called Moab, can you say Moab? Great. So in Moab lived the Moabites. Well, both the sons, Marlon and Killian, fell in love with ladies from Moab. Okay, here's one of them. Okay, and here's the other one. And this one over here was called Ruth. And she married one of the sons of Elkanah and Naomi. Well, the Bible tells us that some sad things happened while they were out of the country of Israel, living in Moab. That one day, Naomi's husband died. And so she was left without a husband. And even worse than that, her two boys also died too. Maybe there was a disease or a plague or something. And so both the boys also died. And so Naomi here is left with her two boys' wives, her two daughters-in-law. One of them was called Orpah and one of them was called Ruth. Now they were still quite young. And Naomi had heard that the famine had finished now back in Israel, back in Bethlehem. So she decides to go back home again. So she says to Orpah and to Ruth, "I am going back to my people, back to Israel, back to Bethlehem. But you are still young. Stay here and get married again." Now, neither of them wanted to stay. They wanted to protect, they wanted to look after Naomi, but she persuaded Orpah to stay. So Orpah stayed. But Ruth comes to Naomi and she says to Naomi, "I am not going to stay. I am going to go with you." And then she said these words. See if you can join in with me. She said to Naomi, her mother-in-law, "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. And Naomi, where you die, I too will die. And the Bible tells us that Ruth held on to Naomi. She clung to her. She loved her. She wanted to look after her, and she wanted to protect her. And so they returned quite a long journey all the way back to Bethlehem. And so they went back to Bethlehem. When they arrived back, the people were pleased to see Naomi. Of course, they'd never met Ruth, had they? But they were very pleased to see Naomi. And they said, Naomi, it's so good to see you. And Naomi said to them, don't call me Naomi. Now, the name Naomi has a meaning. It means pleasant. And Naomi said, don't call me pleasant. Don't call me Naomi. Call me Mara. And Mara means bitter. She said, because when I left, I was full. I was happy. Everything was going good. But now I've come home. My husband has died. My sons have gone. And I am bitter. I am not pleased. And she was sad. But it tells us in the Bible that it was harvest time when she came home. Well, if you keep on reading the story of Ruth in the Bible, you will find what happens next. You see, Naomi was quite poor, really, now. Her family had gone. And so Ruth goes off and she works. And she works in this vineyard, she works in the fields, and she works for a man who is perhaps a bit older than her. And she doesn't realise that he is actually a relative. He is related to Naomi. And he doesn't know that, but he knows that Ruth has been really kind to Naomi. And he starts to give her things. He starts to tell the people that work in the field to give her things, to leave some things behind so she can collect things. She can collect food from the fields. And if you read the story a little bit more, you find out that Ruth falls in love with this man whose name is Boaz. Can you say Boaz? She falls in love with Boaz. Okay, here he is here. This is Boaz. And Ruth and Boaz would get married. And they would look after Naomi. Now, Boaz's mum was a lady called Rahab. And Rahab was not a very nice lady. Actually, she was somebody that would go off with lots of other men. And have lots of men, and probably wasn't married to any of them. But she lived in Jericho. Do you remember when Joshua fought the battle of Jericho? The walls came down. Well, Rahab lived there, and at that time had come to trust and believe in the God of heaven. And so she was taken in and became part of God's people. Well, she got married to a man called Salmon, or Salmon. Sounds like a fish. And they would have a son called Boaz. And Boaz would marry Ruth. When I tell you the next part of the story, and I'm going to finish it this week, then we're going to learn what happens when Ruth has a baby. And her baby will be called Obed. And Obed would grow up and get married. And his wife would have a baby called Jesse. And Jesse would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sons. In fact, 8. Because the 8th son, I'm not going to tell you his name yet, because that will be in a couple of weeks' time. But the 8th son would become the greatest king of Israel before Jesus. In fact, Jesus would be named after this king. It's amazing, isn't it, how the story of the Bible connects, and this bit fits with this bit and leads to this bit. And I hope that you are beginning to see how the Bible fits together. Next week in our story, I want to tell you about the last judge of Israel. He would be born again to a lady who wasn't able to have children for a very long time. And when she did have a child, he would be a very special child and grow up to be a great leader in Israel. Next week, I'm going to tell you the story of Samuel. See you soon. Goodbye.